Hi, my name is Maxim Atfinagenov, and I would like to present you my attempt at a test task for the position of a level designer. This video consists of two parts. In the first part, I will go through the detailed explanations of steps of location design as well as artistic decisions that were made during that process. In the second part, I will show you the level walkthrough from the perspective of a player followed with my commentary. If you want to jump ahead to the walkthrough part, the timestamp will pop up right now. Terms of reference. Based on my terms of reference, which shown on the screen right now, I had to design a level for a non-combat third-person stealth horror. According to a story, we are playing as a retired combat pilot living in his apartment when the town gets struck with an alien virus, which turns people into grotesque flesh-eating monsters. The infected tend to gather near areas of heat or noise. Without being killed or infected, the player must make his way to the airfield, try to rescue as many human survivors as they can, and escape the area by plane. The time required for the level walkthrough is roughly 10 to 15 minutes. For the lack of technical documentation, I had no other information in the project besides the given game scenario. Therefore, I had the freedom to design basic game elements on my own. According to a storyline, this is only just the beginning of the game, which requires less complicated interactions and more entertainment to engage the player into gameplay. This comes down into two things. First of all, controls should be simple and intuitive for the player who launched the game for the first time. That's why the player's actions are limited to three basic movement states: crouching, walking and running, and object interactions with the press of one button. This control system is easy to learn and it provides for the wide variety of game mechanics and situations. Second of all, the game environment should be responsive as the player progresses through the level. This achieved using active or real-time events and passive events, the results outcomes of active events. On a separate note, I want to briefly discuss human rescue missions. In stealth games, just making NPCs follow the player feels rather odd and simplistic and requires development of additional game logic. At the same time, giving a player small one-person aircraft would feel more natural story-wise. Considering these two factors, the human rescue system should be made as follows. Human survivors are out of bounds of playable area and cannot be brought into it. Player in their turn can interact with game environment, which has an effect of rescuing human survivors from dangerous situations, like distracting infected from surrounded survivors using sound. After I made my final decision on a player interaction system, it is time to derive main metric which will be used as basic for a level design. Here I used Unreal Engine version 4.27.2 and Advanced Locomotion System version 4, which is available for free on Epic Games Store. Next, I tweaked some of the locomotion variables to the point it matched the gameplay tempo I envisioned in my head. As for the main metrics, I used walking speed, running speed, crouching speed, player size while standing and player size while crouching, on which level development was based. First things first, I had to gather references to work with. For location references, I used Google Street View, since the place where game unfolds is not explicitly described in terms of reference. I went through dozens of cities from all over the USA to try and find the most suitable for kind of gameplay I have here. For stage direction references, I searched the postcard town pictures as well as photos of similar places from well-known photographers. On top of that, I studied games with a similar gameplay or similar setting, such as Far Cry 5, Left 4 Dead, Resident Evil and Last of Us. Particularly, Far Cry 5 has very vivid small town vibes, while The Last of Us has well-developed stealth missions against infected. Apart from that, I wrote down ideas of gameplay situations that would work well in given conditions and would give the player different types of gameplay in terms of given controls, or would choose scenes of chaos and commotion at the start of epidemic. At this stage, it's just an assorted list of mechanics, imagery, details and so on. When the list is done and the reference gathering is over, the next thing to do is to design the level layout. Based on the references and my own thoughts, I formed a rough level storyline with a list of sublocations. For that case, I had to rely on two principles. The first one is work in contrasts. Consecutive gameplay parts should give player diverse game experience within the specified mechanics so that player would not get bored, and that especially important during the very first missions. Hence, various in-game locations, diverse puzzles, and ways to solve them give players positive and unique game experience, whilst keeping high overall game quality in case one or two gameplay parts would deem boring. The second principle is level progression through scaling. What that means is that the game environment, complexity, variability and sublevel environment should expand and evolve with the level progression. Additionally, there is a principle for all in-game objects that says for every game object on the scene there must be a defined reason for why it is there and what purpose it serves. That means that the object's locations should be based on a player's real-life experience, for the most part applied for houseware and everyday items, or it is explained through the in-game environment and plot. In the case of designing sublocations, that mainly affects the world placement and their connections and correlation. Not to mention, level design should include reusability of in-game objects. That goes for locations, NPCs, usable items and so on. It's not just about straight up copying this object, it's about showing the player the consistency of the world around them and further increasing the overall immersiveness. That kind of game in such setting should keep the player in tension all the time. That's why the decision was made for a nighttime level, to naturally explain the large amount of humans and infected wandering around in the nighttime. It can be described as a festival or holiday on that day. That also creates interesting grotesque visual for selected monsters in the carnival suits. Based on the defined principles, storyline and relying on the general walkthrough time, I formed following sublocation sequence. Characters apartment on the second floor. Learn about enemies and stealth mechanics. Building ledge that leads from apartment to building hall. Shows panoramic view on the city and rumor that's going on around. Building hall, second floor. Stealth section in close quarters with limited time. Building hall, first floor. Search for an alternative way, since path leading to the next sublocations is behind player's back. Boiler room, stealth section in low lit environment. Alley with trash container. Object interaction. Convenience store roof, demonstration of a wider view of chaos as well as the demonstration of main in-game landmark. Airfield traffic control tower, and a short break for a player. Store parking lot, a large-scale stealth section with lots of variability and first rescue mission. Repair shop warehouse. Before opening the doors, it's simple puzzle section and long break for the player. Repair shop warehouse. After opening the doors, it's location reusability for stealth mission. Repair shop front yard. It's a large stealth segment with great variability, first rescued man reusability and the second rescue mission. Highway. Runner section that requires quick decisions from the player. Airfield, small stealth section, third rescue mission. End of the level is a cutscene. Now, after filling the list, we can proceed to plan level geometry. To properly plan out of the level geometry, the following principles should be taken into account. Functionality. Everything should look natural in the context of game settings. I already mentioned that while discussing sublocation design. In the current case, we are talking about specific objects on locations. Atmosphere. Horror atmosphere is a very broad topic for disclosure in general, but in the main principle is to manipulate the player's familiar images and environment, changing them so they start radiating a sense of danger to the player. There are lots of ways to achieve such an effect. In our case, it can be produced through the same techniques are being used in zombie-themed games. Familiar places getting destroyed and changed or repurposed under the influence of both infected monsters and scared survivors, right before the player's eyes. The fact that this is all happening at nighttime scores additional points in creating a proper atmosphere. Horror moments. The key rule to create a good horror is to intervene into the player's personal space. An obvious example of this principle is usage of screamers, even though without abrupt moments players should experience mild psychological discomfort and feeling insecurity. That's why this kind of moments should be implemented in level beforehand. On another note, I want to talk about level navigation, as it is one of the most crucial factors when designing level geometry. I pointed out a couple of basic principles that are important for navigation at the exact level. Explicitly define player's field of action. This includes movement areas, hideouts, and basically and functional geometry of level. Players should be able to see and understand which areas they can walk in and make interactions. This allows not only to avoid moments when the player tries to walk into a non-playable area, but also gives them more convenient display of the main characters and enemies' movements. Makes characters and enemies' action more readable, so that gives the player a feeling of fair play. Clear goal. Since we have a stealth level with the directive of making an escape, that means that the main goal of the game is to get out of town. That requires us to give players an obvious landmark to move to in each of sub-locations. This allows player, especially at the beginning of the game, to keep on track. This is very important, and all of the players' efforts must not be directed to finding a landmark itself, but finding the most optimal way towards that landmark. Also, that includes the appearance of the primary landmark, the airfield traffic control tower. This tower gives the player an understanding of not only the current but also the general direction of travel. There is an important detail that the tower comes into a full view only on the 7th sub-location. This was deliberately made because it scales up the level and gradually expands the player's visual borders. The tower becomes the key landmark in the level progression. Do not overload playable area with decoration items. Readability of the playable area directly depends on the amount of decorations scattered throughout. High amount of visual noise leads to low coordination on the level for a player, as well as it can change the overall visual shape of the level. The last thing I want to mention is color and light differentiation. It's important for a player to see where they can go, where they should go and where they shouldn't. In other words, objects of a certain type shouldn't have distinct key features that will highlight these objects for a player, as well as showing the player the functionality they serve. In my case, there are only just several game entities that I have chosen for the following types of differentiation. Safe zones are easily readable by player but poorly lit. Dangerous zones, in contrast, are well lit with the white light. This allows not only to see the enemies in that area, but also makes player feel unsafe due to being seen in the open. Sub-locations are marked with colored lighting. This is due to light catching the eye better than the color. That is why it makes finding the exit faster upon entering the location and helps keeping it in the field of vision as the player moves. As this is the only time where light marking is being used, I decided that different colored lighting would make much of a distraction for a player and it would be better blend into the game world. The only exception was for red colored lighting, which was used to mark the main landmark of the level, the airfield tower. Though the red marking is used to indicate enemies, the tower is located far and high. Thus it will stand out and won't confuse the player with the same color as the enemies. Red color marking for the enemies. That one is obvious because red color is associated with something dangerous. Human survivors. Because they try to escape from the infected instead of color marking, it would be better to highlight them by placing them above the common level, playing surrounded by infected, which would feel more natural and the world provide levels with visual vertically. Interactable items were highlighted with glustering material instead of plain color, as it a much more common indication for interactable objects. Though this is not a complete list of rules to follow, it contains basic principles that have the most impact on that level. Now, after pointing the general moments, we can move on to level content and geometry planning. In view of the above, I take up analog drawing software, namely a pen and a paper. I draw various variants of the level layout, experiment with the shape, evaluate the pros and cons of each variant, and approximate passage time. After that, I do the final drawing, taking into account all the corrections. I go from the general to specific, so firstly I shape the main structure of the levels and links the sublocations as it allows to the certain limits for the sublocations themselves. As a result, I created the following blueprints. After, I started creating the level blockout using the engine itself. We will consider the special cases while analyzing each location separately, but here is the general pipeline of the work done. A draft blockout of the sublocation, testing and editing until it's played fine, generating a more detailed blockout with the gray boxes of the specific object's placement, the overall composition of the area and row arrangement of lighting, placing on the monsters and setting their routes, testing and editing, a final light placing and the final testing, moving to the next sublocation. Some of the sublocations require more detailed blockout to ensure the place doesn't look as a liminal space, but feels real. It especially refers to the enclosed sublocations such as an apartment or a warehouse. For the monsters, I picked mobs used in Advanced Locomotion System version 4, placed empty actors to the set route, and created such a blueprint for each bot. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time and skill to work with blueprints to create a fair enemy system. But I'm pretty sure the bots I placed are quite enough. It should be understandable for the player if he can be attacked or safe. Having described the general chores of the work, we can delve into analyzing each sublocation separately. It will outline that it was necessary to avoid the generation of my own plot twist and dialogue. So, one of the main tasks was to preserve the dynamic and intensity without using replicas and character progression. Character's apartment, the first sublocation of the level, performs several functions. Firstly, it has to show the essence of the character to the player through the environment, as this is the place he lives and the way of life perfectly tells us about him. Secondly, this is the moment of getting to know the controls and mechanics. Thirdly, here the player faces the enemy for the first time. In a non-combat stealth game, the main mechanics is to crouch, so the first thing you need is to teach that to the player. Often the first 15 to 12 minutes are spent on simple moving around and watching cutscenes or playing tutorials instead of learning the main mechanics and facing the enemy in real conditions. This technique is usually used to let the player get into a calm, normal world and break the peace with some powerful contrast moment. But the tech task was to create a level with an escape from an infected town, which means no time to warm up. Alternatively, we can imagine that the part when the character is living his normal life and communicating with citizen future flesh eaters has already passed. As for the environment, the idea is to perform the recognizable details demonstrating that the character is a former military pilot. Due to the fact that the first part has to be very linear and simple, we can't afford spending much time on being in the apartment. The approximate time of passing the sublocation is nearly 1 minute. So we just put what hints at his past in the way it's possible. Medals, diplomas, cups in the form of airplanes, emblems, prefabricated models of airplanes that the character collects, as well as a standing hanger with a ceremonial military uniform. The environment shall give an idea of who the hero is. The general plan of the sublocation. Part 1. Preliminary. It will allow us to get into the life of the character as we don't have a full-fledged warm-up. Since there are no tags or any UI indicating the goal of the character, the entry implementation is made using visuals. The level starts with entering the apartment and closing the door. All the windows except 2 are closed with the blinds. In one, you can see a street with passers-by walking, singing and having fun. In another, there is a roof of the nearby store, a walk-in with a lantern repairing the roof, an airport command control center in the distance and a salad. You can move around the apartment, but when approaching the kitchen, the camera is fixed on the kettle with flashing animation. Near the kettle, there is an opportunity to interact with it. You have free control back when the kettle is turned on. At the same time, the table lamp starts flashing. You go to the lamp and get the opportunity to interact with it. Interaction causes the character to swing and knock the lamp. At the same time, he hears the rumble behind. Part 2. facing the enemy and learning mechanics and controls, reusing the location according to the new conditions. The camera unfolds and fixes it on a doorway. Through the doorway, you can see that an infected one is in a helmet and an orange suit jumped into a room, breaking the window. By his clothes, you can guess that their creatures once were people. The infected breaks the kettle and passes it into the center of the room beyond the player's side, overturning the table and the cabinet on the go. The attack on the nettle shows that the infected react to heat. The crouch key is shown. You see an easy pass to the window covered with several shelters and sneaking while being out of sight of the enemy. Passing by the broken window, you can see the airport command center, but there is no focus on that scenes at the moment, but the only thing you must do is avoid one specific danger. As it was mentioned above, further the surrounding will gain a larger scale for a sense of the progression. You get to the chair with another monster knocks out the door. It makes the scene more entertaining and at the same time blocks the path to the exit. A glittering window, sill and an opened window appear on your side. Sneaking up to it, you use an interaction button to climb over it and find yourself on the ledge. While climbing over, you hear growling and running sounds from behind the ledge. It is a short gameplay part, which takes about 10 to 15 seconds. After the character is on the ledge, he automatically moves left, and the infected in the orange suit falls out of the window and crashes onto the pavement. During the wall segment, the camera is directing down the street, full of chaos and panic. The scene is purely cinematic and shows the contrast between that was before and what has become. When you reach the window to the hall, you climb over and appear to be in the hall on the second floor, right behind the giant flower pot. The second floor hall. You're standing behind the giant flower pot, and the only thing that guides you is a green exit sign. One infected is trying to break out the door on the right, and another one you saw in the doorway walks from the apartment to the hall and back. Though the part is not difficult, the cramped space makes you feel very uncomfortable sneaking between two infected, but after that you finally get to the first floor. The first floor hall. After you come downstairs, you see the broken out door on one of the apartments in front of you. The infected in an orange suit comes in through the opened front door. Such a frequent occurrence of one specific enemy binds the player emotionally, since the confrontation becomes not just a struggle with a faceless mess, but a collision with some kind of conditional character with whom you have already experienced at several moments, forming a small history of interaction. The infected stops in the doorway, leaving you confused, since the way out is blocked as well as the apartments around. You move the camera in search of another way and see a half-open door with a red light captioned the boiler room. As the red lamp doesn't interfere with the enemy identification, not visibility of the airport command center, which is not visible in here, we assume it to be acceptable. Boiler room. The boiler room is an ordinary labyrinth of boilers and other equipment. A special feature is the dim red lighting, which makes an enemy detection more difficult. This was done intentionally in order to slightly shake the pattern of behavior forming. The landmark is a green exit light, getting to which you get to alley between the house and the store. The alley. When you enter the alley, right in the front of the exit there is a dumpster indicated with light. Glittering handle shows you that you can interact with it. Near the exit there is a section of the pipe that it passes through the facade of the house. Before you reach the dumpster, the infected in the orange suit jumps out, breaking the window leading to the first floor, and starts patrolling the area near the steam jet. In the moments the monster looks away, you gotta move the dumpster. On the other side of the alley, beside the street lamp, there is a ladder. Staying behind the dumpster, you must get there and get the ladder up. You are noticed by the infected at the moment you stray climbing the ladder. It runs up and starts climbing after you. As soon as you manage to reach the roof, you push the ladder away and it fell down with the infected on it. That conventionally looks the fragment connected with the infected worker as it was his ladder once, and it's rather ironic that the same ladder eventually saved our hero from the infected plague in the streets. The store roof. This sublocation is intended to be some sort of respite. A remarkable detail is that there are tools on the roof and the part of disassembled roof covering. It's done within the framework of narrating using environment. Also, you can climb down to get to the main street, but there are so many infected and you have no chance to survive if you get there. From the roof, you can have a wider vision of scene of chaos and distraction. Moreover, right in front of the airport command center is shown. To cross the location, you need to bypass the landmark, the green store sign, and get the visor over the entrance of the store. While you're passing by the sign, the chunk of the rooftop crashes and falls down, which is accompanied by shaking of the camera and harsh sound. You manage to cling to it at the last moment. This is kinda small jump scare, as by this moment you felt somewhat safe and relaxed. Such screamers do work perfectly against this background. Staying at the visor, you can see the whole next sublocation, store parking. It is a small but very emotionally important moment when you sense the danger but still have to go down there. Store parking. Parking is a stealth passage location with little variation. The space is limited by the crashed truck on its side and the fallen tree that these trucks crashed into. There is only one small fork in this location, and it concerns the rescue of the first survivor. Behind the fence there is a trailer park and the several trailers are burning. On one of the burning trailers there is a survivor with a gun who screams for help. His trailer is surrounded by infected, and the path to the next trailer, which you can jump over, is blocked by flames. You can go a long way and activate the fire hydrant next to the trailer, but be prepared that it's a dangerous zone in enemy sight. If the rescue mission is successful, the survivor will jump on the top of the next trailer and disappear from your sight. The destination point is a bus that broke through the fence of the neighboring auto repair shop, in the way that back door turns out to be on your side and the front door is already behind the fence. Through the glass you see one of the infected monsters, to keep the tension only. After leaving the bus you can enter the auto repair shop warehouse through the back door. Auto repair shop warehouse. A simple puzzle-like location created as another respite between levels. I prototyped the functionality of this location using a blueprint as follows. The warehouse is a bunch of pallets and boxes. Initially, you catch the eye of a lifting gate with the handle at the bottom, a control panel on the balcony burning yellow, and the ladder to the control panel. Next to the door, there is an inscription: "Open the gate using a crane only." You obviously go to the control panel and activate it, but the crane hook is stuck on the balcony on the other side of the warehouse. At the level, I marked it with the red to make it more obvious. The control panel lights up green as soon as you enter the balcony and release the hook. You return to the panel and activate it, so the crane hook picks up the handle and leads the door. At the moment, two infected enter the warehouse and start walking between the pallets and boxes. The crane winch sparks and the door is starting to close. You must get to the door before it's closed, hiding from the infected. Right after the door, there is an auto repair store yard. Auto repair shop yard. Since this is a very large shop for the large machinery, it has a large yard littered with a huge variety of large size details and spare parts. The sublocation is also indeed for the stealth passage, where you need to avoid enemies sneaking between different obstacles. But what's noteworthy, that location is much larger than any previous one, so it's up to be very variable. Also, it's up to you to decide which way you go and if you're going to save a survivor or not. Interesting fact, if you manage to save the survivor from the flame or parking, there will be one additional enemy on the location. When you reach the middle of the yard, it starts walking directly at you, thus inducting a panic attack. But when he gets close enough, he gets a headshot. The player hears a shot from behind, and when the camera turns back, sees the first rescued survivor with a gun on the roof of the warehouse, who waves to him and runs out of sight. As for the rescue of the second survivor, he's trapped between two truck trailers. surrounded by a crowd of infected people near the right exit. On the one hand, the opening is narrow and the infected do not fit through, but on the other, it holds back one of the infected with the pellet in his hands. You can walk on the left side only to get out, but before leaving, you can turn on the boombox and distract the infected from the survivor. But your way out will be blocked, and if you hesitate and stay still, they will find you and kill you. That's why you need to retreat as fast as you can right after you turn the boombox and get around the yard by the left side. The survivor will climb onto the trailer using a pallet and jump over the fence out of your line of sight, which will break the pallet. The exit is also blocked by two trailers. Between them there is a gap so that you can leave the yard squeezing through it. Highway. After you are on the highway, you can clearly see the airport command center. The camera turns to the left, so you can see a swarm of the infected heading right at you. The run button is shown on the screen, and you start running from the infected up the highway, maneuvering between cars. When you run over the turn, you see the same crowd running towards you. You must run into a hole in the fence and run along the trail until you run onto the highway again. Your way appears to be blocked by a truck. You will have to crouch to go under it. That will be end of the running part. Moments like that shake the player who throughout the game mostly had to wait and make slow decisions. The segment forced him to react quickly and move away from the usual pattern. Further, there will be a small stealth part with only one enemy, after which you will be able to get to the airport territory through the hole in the fence. A small element of the narrative through the environment is that the truck blocked the road, and a detour was formed around, which also turned out to be overloaded with cars. Along the track of this detour, you approach the airport. In the segment about the airport, walking with the terrain is worth mentioning. It was necessary to make an accent on a segment from the highway for greater verticality and memorability. To achieve the right effect, I drew a height map in Photoshop, which then I placed in the world machine and proceed to make it more realistic. After testing an evaluation map in Real Engine, I tweaked it in the Photoshop and world machine until I got the result I needed. Airport. The airport sublocation is a short and easy stealth level, so as not to torment the player when he is already reached the airport. There is a third survivor who can also be saved. He is on a high box surrounded by infected. You can get out of the safe zone and turn on the loader, which is staying nearby. The loader will slowly drive next to the survivor, and he will jump onto the roof of the loader and then over the fence. When you reach the door illuminated with yellow light, the final cutscene starts, in which the character gets on the plane and flies away. Saving and checkpoint system. I would like to specify details on the triggers of saving or checkpoints. They are placed after each the same type segment. Most often it's just a trigger at the beginning of each sublocation, but for example in Warehouse the game is saved both at the entrance and when the gate is open. Thus the checkpoints are often enough not to frustrate the player in case of failure. I don't usually do so in a real project, but in this case I will replace a lot of grey boxes with the ready-made 3D models from polygon packs I bought earlier. I've described the full process of technical and imaginative creation of the level for a test task indeed. There was a great lack of understanding the setting of the game and specific documentation related to the game design, but all the goals set for the test task we achieved, and now I propose we proceed to the gameplay demonstration. Gameplay. Here is the part of the video I'm going to demonstrate gameplay within the level I designed. Some details that were not implemented in the engine will be explained or showed during the demonstration.